So a few months back, I did a video about the Beatles' final 1965 UK tour, and in that video, I shared this list of Beatles' white whales, really is just a quick passing clip. It was just something that I threw together sort of as a visual aid, right? I have been amazed at how many comments and messages I've gotten asking me about this list. So no, there's no official Beatles list of white whales. It's just something that I threw together of lost and or missing Beatles media that fans consider holy grails. You know, like off the top of my head. That said, everything on the list is totally legit, so I thought it would be fun to actually go over them in detail. So let's just get started. Okay, so we're just going to jump right into this with Carnival of Light. This is probably the most well-known of all unreleased Beatles content. Carnival of Light is an unreleased, highly experimental Beatles song. So the story is this. In December 1966, Paul McCartney was approached to create a piece of music for an upcoming festival in London, known as the Million Volt Light and Sound Rave. This song would become known as Carnival of Light, and the Beatles recorded it in January during the sessions for Penny Lane. So Paul McCartney has actually talked about this during interviews with Howard Stern, and he said that he showed up to the studio before the rest of the band to get set up, and then when they arrived, he basically told them to run around and make weird sounds and noises. Apparently they did this for 15 minutes, slapped a bunch of echo on it, and called it a day. So what does Carnival of Light actually sound like? It is reportedly extremely avant-garde, basically an art piece, and my guess is that it probably has a similar vibe to Revolution 9 on the White Album, basically a sound collage that makes you feel like you're on a bad acid trip. Beatles historian Mark Lewisohn is actually one of the few people that has heard this recording, and his notes pretty much align with Paul's story. On January 5th, 1967, McCartney finished up overdubbing a vocal track onto Penny Lane. Then, him and the rest of the band laid down what George Martin called Untitled Take 1, which ran for about 14 minutes. Lewisohn also provides a track-by-track breakdown of the song's construction, which gives us a pretty good idea of what it probably sounded like. According to Lewisohn, of all the frightening sounds, it was the voices on track 3 which really set the scene. John and Paul screaming dementedly and bawling aloud random phrases like, "Are you alright?" and "Barcelona." The song, now known as Carnival of Light, was played with a light show at the rave on January 28th. Although a second date for the festival was scheduled on February 4th, one of the people actually involved in organizing the event, Dudley Edwards, has said that Carnival of Light was only played at the January 28th date, with the second rave instead featuring performances by Jimi Hendrix and The Soft Machine. So why is this considered a white whale among Beatles collectors? Well, unlike a lot of unreleased Beatles content, Carnival of Light has never actually been bootlegged. In fact, outside of a few select individuals, no one even really knows what it sounds like. In 1996, McCartney wanted to release it as part of the Beatles anthology set, but he was apparently shot down by George and Ringo. Fortunately, Carnival of Light is not lost. Paul McCartney has said in interviews multiple times that he still has the recording, even in recent years. However, it remains a mystery to the public, perhaps because, at least according to Paul,
I said, I don't think you'd like it.
Alright, moving along. We Can Work It Out, Live 65. So this next one on our list, I covered pretty extensively in my recent video about the Beatles' final UK tour. As for why it's considered a white whale, the Beatles only ever played We Can Work It Out as part of their live setlist during this one tour. So basically, if you didn't see the Beatles on one of these 9 dates in December 1965, you've never heard a live version of We Can Work It Out. Unfortunately, the 1965 UK tour is somewhat shrouded in mystery, and very few photos even exist of any of it. The same goes for the audio, and until today, no live recordings of We Can Work It Out have ever surfaced. We do know that they definitely played it though. The song is on the famous set list that is still attached to Lennon's Rickenbacker 325. We also have a few pictures showing Lennon at the Vox Continental keyboard, which he played during this live arrangement. I will also mention that this tour contained a unique live version of Yesterday, with Paul on keyboards as well, but audio has never surfaced. I wouldn't call it a white whale as much as We Can Work It Out though, because we at least have plenty of live footage from 1966, the following year, of them playing Yesterday. Either way, make sure to check out my video on the entire final 1965 UK tour if you'd like more info on this honestly not very well covered era of the Beatles' career. Okay, next up, missing Shea Stadium footage. I'm gonna lump these two together because they're basically the same White Whale, just different songs, right? So as many of you already know, the Beatles' Shea Stadium concert in 1965 is iconic. It was the biggest concert in the world at the time, and the piercing sounds of over 55,000 screaming fans cemented this moment into music history forever. The concert itself was filmed and edited into a TV special, complete with overdubs the Beatles themselves added months later to fix the sound quality issues at the show.
When I'm home, feeling you are holding me tight, yeah.
But anyway, this documentary aired in Britain in March 1966, and later in the US in January 1967. But just a few notes about this concert presentation. It really wasn't an accurate representation of the show. For example, the audio used in Twist and Shout was actually just straight up lifted from the 1964 Hollywood Bowl performance. And Ringo's number, Act Naturally, they just pasted a straight up dub over the record version, and it's terribly synced, by the way. It's not even like remotely convincing that it's live. In terms of preservation, though, this isn't that much of an issue because the raw, unedited soundboard recording has since been bootlegged and is, like, widely available for a while now. But that's not the problem, that's not the White Whale. Two songs were completely omitted from the concert film, She's a Woman and Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby. Until today, video footage of the Beatles performing these two songs at Shea Stadium has never surfaced. So what happened here? There's conflicting stories. For years, the rumor has been that these songs were not even filmed because they had to change camera reels. And actually, this is even the explanation given on Wikipedia. I'm not so sure this is true, though. First, because, well, it doesn't make any f***ing sense. Here's the setlist at Shea. So you're telling me that they were able to film the super short 1-minute version of Twist and Shout, did a reel change for She's a Woman, filmed only 3 more songs, did yet another reel change, and then managed to continue capturing the remaining 6 songs uninterrupted. What? From my research, here's what I think happened. Brian Epstein would not have left this to chance, right? And the entire show was likely recorded, both audio and video. When Brian first received a 16mm print of the footage, it more than likely contained the entire show, including these 2 songs. When this raw footage was eventually edited for the documentary special, they cut out these 2 songs for whatever reason. Perhaps they felt like they were the weakest, I can't say. Maybe it was just to keep the program at 50 minutes, allowing for 10 minutes of commercial breaks, which honestly is probably the more likely reason. All that to say, back in the day, when footage got left on the cutting room floor, it literally got left on the cutting room floor. And they used to sweep that floor and its contents right into the trash can. It didn't end up on a Blu-ray special feature a few months later. So why do I think this is the case? Well, throughout the documentary, the cameras do not stay on the Beatles the entire time. There are several shots of the crowd, alternate angles, the stage, etc. Splicing these shots into the main film creates interest for the viewer, and in the world of video production, we simply refer to this as B-roll. When we look at the B-roll footage from Shea, there are a lot of clips that certainly appear to show the Beatles playing these missing songs. I mean, look here, that D7 chord way up on the neck, that's gotta be the iconic rhythm for She's a Woman. There's also a few close-up shots of Harrison playing riffs that honestly look like they could be from Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby. Thanks to the channel Beatles Fan Club Creations for organizing the B-roll footage back in 2021. As far as official, high-quality video like the rest of the show, the footage is likely lost forever unless someone has a raw 16mm print stored in a vault somewhere. Here's a super rare 8mm film clip of the concert that probably gives a better depiction of what the audience saw. I've heard some people claim that this clip shows Harrison at the microphone, but sorry, I just don't see it. And by the way, the audience view at Shea Stadium really was that bad. I know this because I've been to Shea Stadium when it existed. Shea felt like a very tall stadium, and if you were on the upper deck, you were seriously up there, like several stories up. You can actually see in this picture of the field how far away the diamond is. And in fact, here's a side-by-side with the Beatles stage just to give you an idea of scale. And the concert was at nighttime too, so I'm pretty sure the audience could not see or hear jack shit. Anyway, back to the White Whales. Luckily, the audio for these songs remains preserved. Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby was included on the anthology, and She's a Woman has been bootlegged for a while. It was also officially released when it appeared during the ending credits of Ron Howard's special screening of the Shea concert back in 2016, which I really wish they would release on Blu-ray already. But as far as the complete video footage goes, my bet is that it's sadly lost forever. And I'm guessing that if anyone were going to have access to it, it probably would have been Ron, and he didn't show it, so... Alright, now we're really moving. 27 minutes of Helter Skelter. What am I talking about? The story goes like this. The Beatles first laid down Helter Skelter at Abbey Road during the White Album sessions on July 18th, 1968. During this session, they recorded 3 takes of the song. According to Mark Lewisohn, take 1 was 10 minutes and 40 seconds. Take 2 ran 12 minutes and 35 seconds, and Take 3 went on for an incredible 27 minutes and 11 seconds. This is the 27-minute Helter Skelter that fans are referring to. Now, I would be willing to bet that this certainly still exists, and we'll probably actually hear this one someday. The reason I say that is because Take 2 of this July 18th session was already included on the anthology back in the 90s, and unfortunately, the version that they included fades out around the 4-minute mark. Remember, the second take ran for over 12 minutes. Still, this is proof that the recordings from this session clearly still exist, but the infamous 27-minute Take 3 has never been released or bootlegged. Sorry. As for what it sounded like, I'm willing to bet that it was probably pretty similar to the version you hear on Anthology 3, which is the take that immediately preceded it after all. It is important to note, though, that these earlier versions of Helter Skelter were much slower in tempo and drenched in live tape echo. So what you hear on the White Album is actually not from these July sessions at all, but rather a complete remake of the song 2 months later in September, with a much faster tempo and the hard-rocking beat we've all come to know and love. Twist and Shout, Take 2. Alright, so as many fans know, the Beatles' first album, Please Please Me, was recorded in one day, basically in one 10-hour session, on February 11th, 1963. As Mark Lewisohn puts it, there can scarcely have been 585 more productive minutes in the history of recorded music. I honestly can't think of a better way of describing it. Anyhow, the last song on the album is Twist and Shout, which coincidentally was also the last song they recorded that day. Fans will know this, that John Lennon had a really bad cold, probably even the flu. It was actually one of the coldest British winters on record at the time, and you can actually hear how congested he is in basically the entire album. They saved Twist and Shout for last, knowing it would just completely destroy whatever was left of John's voice. So the famous performance that you hear on the album is in fact that end of day, first attempt, completely live take that they did during this session. Amazing. However, a lot of people don't know that even back then, they recognized that Lennon's voice was probably not sounding its best. It was extremely strained. George Martin did have them do a second take, and in fact, at least according to his notes, it was a complete take from start to finish. As George Martin put it, John's voice had gone, and the second take was just totally scrapped. Unfortunately, as is the case with production norms back then, this tape was just likely destroyed as well. It's not surprising, and I mean, this is the same reason why we still don't have a true stereo mix of She Loves You. They used to just throw this shit away back then. I mean, they were throwing away entire multi-tracks back then, so I'm pretty sure they weren't just holding on to alternative takes. I should also mention here that there's probably a ton of lost tapes from the earlier years. I can't cover them all in one video. Like one example, this same 1963 session, actually, the Beatles recorded a version of Hold Me Tight, and they also threw it out. They would, of course, re-record this song later for their second album, but this original session is completely lost. So, just another example. Alright, Please Please Me, the slow version. Alright, how do I explain this? So, you know that overused movie trope where the nerdy girl takes off her glasses and lets down her hair and you suddenly realize she was pretty all along? Well, the musical equivalent of that is basically when a band writes a song that has potential, but it's a boring, slow-paced ballad, somebody tells them to make it faster, and it suddenly becomes a massive hit. It's basically a meme at this point, and it was pretty much the entire plot device in the movie That Thing You Do, which is actually one of my favorite movies, by the way.
1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. That's too fast, guy. Slow down. Come on. Slow down. Too fast. Slow it down.
But anyway, this actually happened for the Beatles with Please Please Me. And just to clarify, we're not talking about the previous 10-hour session that we just went over. The Beatles presented this song, Please Please Me, to George Martin way back in 1962, on September 4th, actually, and it's crazy that we know that date. It's probably because this was the famous session where, despite their objections, the Beatles recorded their cover of How Do You Do It at George Martin's request. This was also the same session that they pushed back and wanted their first single to be an original, also recording Love Me Do the same day. In the end, George Martin gave the band what they wanted, and the rest is history. However, it's not like the Beatles just went in to record these two songs. They actually rehearsed several of them for George Martin that day, one of which was Please Please Me. This early version of Please Please Me was a slow-paced Roy Orbison-style ballad with a single vocal and no harmonica. Listen to Roy Orbison's Only the Lonely if you kind of want to hear what inspired Lennon to write Please Please Me. Most fans know the story. George Martin still felt that he needed reassurance after this September 4th session, and he famously had the Beatles return to Abbey Road a week later to re-record Love Me Do. This was the famous session that poor Ringo was demoted to tambourine duty, while session drummer Andy White played drums. This tambourine version is the one that appears on the Please Please Me album and is probably the one most people are familiar with today, but the original version, the single with Ringo on drums from the week before, still remains as the original, single, and is widely available if you want to hear it. You can immediately tell the difference between the two because, one of them doesn't have a tambourine. But anyway, in addition to this remake of Love Me Do, the Beatles also recorded two other songs on this date. One of them was P.S. I Love You, the B-side to Love Me Do, apparently also with Andy White on drums. However, the Beatles also recorded this slow version of Please Please Me, and in fact they even did multiple takes. It was at this moment that George Martin told them that the song had potential, but it would be much better if they increased the tempo and added some harmonies. Again, the rest is history. Unfortunately, as is the pattern with these things, EMI's policy was not to keep session tapes back then, especially once a song had been mastered and completed for disc. So because George Martin told them to basically go back to the drawing board with Please Please Me, it was never mastered and likely discarded. So unless an acetate turns up, basically a one-off temporary disc that someone could bring home that day, I doubt we'll ever hear anything from these early sessions, and more on acetates later. Scene at 6:30, She Loves You. Basically, there are literally hundreds of lost Beatles TV appearances, and this one particular television network, Granada Television, had a show called Scene at 6:30. And the Beatles certainly would have known about Granada TV because they grew up in Liverpool, and that was part of the broadcast area. The Beatles performed a ton of Granada TV shows in their early years. The main issue is that pretty much all of it is lost or destroyed. Here's just a quick example. August 22nd, 1962. You know that famous clip of the Beatles playing Some Other Guy at the Cavern Club? Well, they also played Kansas City, but it's lost. October 17th, 1962. The Beatles played Some Other Guy and Love Me Do this time on Granada TV, and by the way, this is technically the Beatles' first TV appearance because the previous Some Other Guy clip, it wasn't aired on TV until November, so this one from October is technically the first, but it's missing. October 29th, 1962. This time they do Love Me Do and A Taste of Honey. It's lost. December 17th, 1962. Granada Television show People and Places. The Beatles sing Love Me Do and Twist and Shout. Also lost. January 16th, 1963. The Beatles mime to Ask Me Why and Please Please Me. Missing. April 16th, 1963. Scene at 6:30. The Beatles mime From Me to You. Also missing. And finally, August 14th, 1963, Scene at 6:30. The Beatles record clips of Twist and Shout and She Loves You. This is the original one I was talking about in my list. The Twist and Shout footage remains, but the She Loves You clip is completely lost. Either way, given the context, I think you'll see this isn't exactly an anomaly, and in fact, I'm not even trying to criticize Granada TV. It was just policy in those days for networks to discard their footage after it was broadcast. In fact, I bet in some cases it probably wasn't even taped, it was just live fed. I'm not sure. Someone that knows more about network TV would be able to tell me about that. But there is literally a giant database of unreleased Beatles video footage, some of which I'm going to talk about in a moment, but I'll put the link to that list in the description. One example I really wish that we had were the Beatles' performances on People and Places. This is another Granada TV show, many of which were actually live. These shots were taken of a TV screen in October 1962, showing a bizarre stage setup. John, the solo singer, without a guitar, for Love Me Do. Incredibly, though, audio from the Beatles' late 1962 performances was discovered in 2019, thanks to Adrian Killen, a 16-year-old who was smart enough to record this audio from his TV in 1962. And by the way, we're going to hear more about smart teenagers that recorded shit off their TV coming up in the video. Alright, New Musical Express 1966 concert footage. So I think I did a pretty good job of covering this in my video about George Harrison's Gibson SG, but here's just a quick summary. The New Musical Express shows were big poll winners concerts held yearly, and I believe 1964 was the first year that they started filming this and the show was broadcast on TV. Not surprisingly, the Beatles appeared basically every year, and the 1964 and 1965 performances are both great examples of their live abilities. The video footage is very well known and you can find it all over YouTube. The May 1966 show, however, was not filmed. The story goes that the Beatles' performance was originally set to be filmed as it had been the previous years, but there was some kind of contractual dispute that led Brian Epstein requiring the cameras to be turned off during their performance. This is really unfortunate for two reasons, actually. One, because it's the only time George Harrison played a Gibson SG for the entire show, and two, because it's the last time the Beatles would ever do a scheduled performance in the UK. After this, the only time that you'd ever have a chance to see the Beatles live again is if you happen to be in the right place at the right time 3 years later. The Eamon Andrews Show footage, 1965. So like I said before, there's a lot of lost TV appearances when it comes to Beatles content, but this particular one is notable for a couple of reasons. So first of all, Eamon Andrews was a talk show host, and the goal of this show was basically to mimic the success of similar American talk shows like The Tonight Show. In April 1965, and this would be basically at the height of Beatlemania in the United Kingdom, they appeared on the Eamon Andrews Show and gave a full extended group interview. Luckily, audio footage of this interview has since been recovered and it can now be found on YouTube, but the video footage is completely lost. The Beatles also did a live musical broadcast, because they were on the show, although technically they mimed, of two songs, Ticket to Ride and Yes It Is. Unless I'm mistaken, I don't think there's any other promo clips for Yes It Is, so this alone would have been pretty interesting to see. Moving on, the cavern base photograph from Atlanta 1965. So I think I covered this in depth also on a previous video, Paul Breaks a String, which did way better than I expected it to. But the story in that video was basically that on August 18th, the Beatles did a show in Atlanta. Just 3 days after Shea Stadium, by the way, and Paul broke a bass guitar string in front of 34,000 people. I actually shared a bootleg clip of the show at Atlanta Stadium with the exact moment that it happens.
We'll have to wait a minute now while Paul changes his bass. He's broken a string.
But the reason I included it on my list is because Paul would have switched to his spare bass, the original 1961 Hofner that he played way back in the Cavern Club. To my knowledge, there was never a public live performance during the Beatles' touring years where Paul actually played this spare bass, and you only ever really see it in backstage photos, later during the Revolution promo clip, and occasionally during the Get Back sessions. And yes, this is the same bass that was stolen and only recently recovered, so I think it would be pretty cool to see a photo of Paul playing it at one of the Beatles' massive stadium concerts. Alright, all missing Top of the Pops footage. So I think this one is included on my list because it has a funny story attached to it that sort of emphasizes how strange the world of media preservation can be. So Top of the Pops was a weekly music program that ran for literally decades, and during the Beatles' heyday, they filmed several pre-recorded promotional clips for Top of the Pops. As you can probably already guess, most of them are missing. For instance, July 7th, 1964, they mime Long Tall Sally, A Hard Day's Night, and Things We Said Today. Totally gone. November 16th, 1964, another mime, I Feel Fine, and She's a Woman. Also missing. But here's the fun one. April 10th, 1965. They do Ticket to Ride and Yes It Is. At the same time, an episode of Doctor Who, yes, the famous British TV serial, aired an episode that featured a 15-second clip of the Beatles as part of the actual plot. The clip used in the episode was in fact footage from the Top of the Pops episode. So for whatever reason, BBC didn't throw out the Doctor Who tapes, so this 15 seconds is now the only remaining video evidence of this performance. How crazy is that? Here's another example. On June 16th, 1966, the Beatles again performed on Top of the Pops, miming to Paperback Writer and Rain. This performance was actually kind of unique in that the Beatles didn't film it pre-recorded, but they actually showed up for a live broadcast. So I guess it was a live lip sync, you could say. Like so many other clips though, this one is lost as well, which is actually kind of weird because it's super well known. The pictures from this performance are some of the most popular Beatles posters that people have hanging up, and as luck would have it, in 2019, an 11-second clip of this performance finally surfaced. What you're seeing right now is an 8mm home movie that a fan shot of their TV screen when this actually aired. And naturally, this incredibly rare footage was discovered in the first place you'd expect: Mexico. I'm actually totally serious and I'm not kidding, but this is actually why I have faith that some of these white whales will eventually turn up someday. You never know if someone halfway across the world has a copy somewhere. Remember, it took until 2008 for a complete version of Metropolis, Fritz Lang's 1927 German film, to become available, and it's only because somebody found a film reel in Argentina 80 years later. How does a film reel from Germany end up in Argentina? I mean, actually, you know what, don't answer that. But all these stories sort of emphasize my point, right? With a lot of this Beatles media stuff, the best chance that we're going to get at seeing any of these things is if some forward-thinking fan happened to film their TV screen at home or record it in some other way. And trust me, there are a lot of Beatles TV performances that are missing, and many of them we only even have evidence that they existed because someone took a picture of their television screen. And by the way, there are tons of music shows in the 1960s that have missing footage. Thank Your Lucky Stars is a similar show that also has a ton of lost footage. Either way, I will share that link to the Beatles video footage list, which is mostly complete as far as I can see, because it's definitely like a rabbit hole to go down. There's a lot we haven't seen. Next up is The Tonight Show footage from 1968. So this one is actually a perfect follow-up to the last white whale, May 14th, 1968, episode 1429 of The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. John Lennon and Paul McCartney are headlined as featured guests. What kind of sucks is that Johnny Carson was actually on vacation, so guest host Joe Garagiola actually interviewed them. You'd think that with massive stars like Lennon and McCartney, they'd have shifted the schedule so that Johnny would be there. I mean, how amazing would it have been to see Johnny Carson interview Lennon and McCartney? But anyway, the footage is all lost. Apparently NBC was no better than the BBC when it came to preservation. But luckily, it's not completely lost. A few years back, an 8mm film was discovered that a fan recorded off their screen when it actually aired. It's not complete and the quality is pretty bad, but still, this is an incredible find. And unfortunately, I don't know who the original source was to credit, but unbelievably, in June of 2024, a fan named Don Giller shared the complete audio from this interview on YouTube. As a high school student, he had actually recorded the audio directly from his TV onto reel-to-reel tape by attaching alligator clips to the TV speakers. I'll leave a link to that video in the description. Alright, What Goes On and It's For You demos. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of times one-off copies of the day's work in the studio, or even home recordings in some cases, would be made into what were essentially temporary discs. These discs were made of a thin metallic base and coated with a layer of vinyl, and they're known as acetates, and they are not known to be durable. The sound quality begins to degrade rapidly, and most of them unfortunately have probably degraded over the years or just been completely destroyed. The thing is, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of times demos and studio takes were scrapped, so as a result, the only thing that ends up existing is the acetate that somebody happened to bring home that day. Two examples of this are actually What Goes On and It's For You. What Goes On originally appeared on the Beatles' 1965 album Rubber Soul, with Ringo taking the lead vocal. However, Lennon actually wrote this song very early on in his songwriting career, and in fact, he recorded a home demo in 1963 with Paul singing harmony vocals and presumably playing piano while John played the acoustic. The acetate of this demo, remember the original tape is long gone, popped up in 2012, I believe, and last I checked it was sold for over £10,000 in 2017. Andrew from Parlogram, and by the way, he has an awesome channel, I watch his stuff all the time. I think he was actually the one who sold it most recently, and we're lucky that he even shared a short clip of the acetate as proof. Unfortunately, the entire demo has yet to be released, and it's likely in the hands of a very lucky collector with lots of expendable income. It's For You is basically the same story. It's a Paul McCartney song that he wrote for Cilla Black, and until 2016, his original demo was considered just gone forever. Of course, it popped up at an auction, and we got to hear a whopping 20 seconds of it as proof that it was indeed legit. No, the full demo is still not available, but even the short clip back then inspired me so much that I actually did a full What Would This Have Sounded Like Had the Beatles Done It type cover a few years back. And I'll post a link to that in the description if you want to see it. But again though, I say don't lose hope. Weirdly enough, it's probably more likely that we'll see acetates pop up than any of the TV footage that I mentioned previously. But these things do happen all the time. I mean, for example, we thought Paul McCartney's demo of A World Without Love, Peter and Gordon's hit, was long gone. But in 2013, someone leaked it to YouTube. So that's all I can say. I'm sure we haven't seen the end of demo tapes surfacing after decades. Help, deleted scenes. So in my original video, you actually couldn't see the end of the list because it was cut off, but here we go. You may be surprised to find out that both the Beatles movies have a lot of deleted scenes. Like Take a Hard Day's Night. I remember back in the day, I was pretty amazed to see that the Beatles filmed and edited a complete sequence of You Can't Do That for the concert at the end of the movie. The entire scene was scrapped, but the clip was sent by Brian Epstein to the Ed Sullivan Show to be used as a promo. And ironically, if this hadn't happened, the footage probably would have been lost forever. I believe it was first released back in 1994 in a documentary about the movie. Anyhow, Andrew from Parlogram also did a recent video about Paul McCartney's deleted scene in A Hard Day's Night. And actually, I never really thought about this before until he pointed it out, but Paul totally is missing a scene. George has his hilarious fashion review, and then John has the back and forth in the stairwell, Ringo has the epic This Boy montage, but where's Paul's solo scene? Well, Andrew revealed that the script did in fact have a scene for Paul, and it was completely filmed and deleted. However, it's almost certain that the footage is gone and we'll never see it. But anyway, this bullet point was about Help, not A Hard Day's Night, so there's actually quite a few deleted scenes in Help, and I actually think there's more of a chance that the footage might still exist. I say might. So for some examples of deleted scenes, right? There originally was a sequence of Ringo opening his refrigerator to reveal a live cow, which he proceeds to milk. And then there was another attempt scene, when they're trying to steal the ring, where the cult members tie an alligator to a pole and then try to do a drive-by finger biting on Ringo. There was also a missing scene that explained why the Beatles were even in Austria to begin with, as well as a sequence of them renting a toboggan for some reason. Some of the footage from this same day actually does appear in the movie, like this shot of them falling backwards into the snow. There was also an extended scene where the Beatles visited a school of transcendental elocution that was completely cut from the film, and it's actually the longest complete scene that was scrapped, I believe. And I have to mention this because I just learned it. The actress in this photo, her name is Wendy Richard, and she literally only found out she'd been cut from the movie the day it came out, and only because she wasn't invited to the premiere. How much does that suck? There's a lot of missing Bahamas footage, including John riding a bicycle while in a swimming pool, as seen here in this crazy rare 8mm behind the scenes footage. And there was an entire scene where the Beatles acquired these tiny sports cars and sped around a quarry. The fact that these clips appear in the trailer are actually what gives me hope that copies of the raw film were made, and hopefully footage might still exist somewhere. There was also a funny scene where they set up another trap, George in disguise as Ringo, to lure the cult members into a treehouse, but they can't get to him because he's got a bubble dome that protects him. This little clip right here is also from the original US Drive-In trailer. I haven't even covered all the deleted scenes in Help, but maybe one day they'll turn up. But anyway, that's all for this video. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed. See you next time.